Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Mini Metro. This is it. This is the final achievement that I needed to do. And it is done. It is so done. I am so glad this achievement can go fuck itself now. But before I celebrate, I still need to do this video, so I will at least do you the favor, you, the viewer, of sort of just recounting some of my thoughts through completing this achievement. So, what is this achievement? This is the second Harbour Crossing, as you can probably see in the title already, which is deliver 1,500 passengers or 1,500 in Auckland using no more than 2 tunnels. That is why this achievement can go fuck itself. Because being restricted only to 2 tunnels means that in terms of the station spawning, you can either have some colossally bad luck. There would definitely be some rearrangement of lines and trains required, and on top of that, you will also need to micromanage your trains. And given the structure of this map, it's very easy for stations to spawn randomly, which will make you want to use more than your allocated tunnels. And it's very easy to want to move a line across any body of water, use up your 3rd tunnel, and fail the achievement. So that is why this achievement can go fuck itself. Moving on, it's in terms of general recommendations. First things first. Let's start by stating the obvious. You can easily at the end of each week, like say if you offer the choice of something or a pair of tunnels, you can always take the other thing, whether or not you will end up using it or not. I've sort of just playing around with carriages a bit and just sort of like trying to figure out when is a good situation to have a carriage as opposed to, like, say, adding another locomotive. And I'm getting a bit of a better idea about it now. And but yeah, what you can see here right now is one of the reasons why this achievement can go fuck itself. You see right now I've had to adjust the purple line in order to allocate the station on the far right with the blue line. And that will happen a lot. That's it. That's it. There is some strategies you can think of just to get around it. And one of the strategies that sort of becomes a very consistent method that I use is just sort of switching the green line between the 2 stations. Because it's like while the green train is attending to one, the other will pile up, and then you can, if you keep a close eye on, in my case, the green line, you can actually just move the green line back once the train's finished picking up all the customers from the current linked line, and then just move it back, and then you can see that the train will clear out the other one, and then you just move it back again. Of course, in terms of actual construction costs, it's obviously not a very practical solution, but thankfully this is just a game. And certainly one of the I almost negated myself the achievement there with trying to loop the green line over, somewhat not very well, and here's me thinking, maybe can I loop the blue line over as well? Albeit not so successfully either. And the interesting thing I'll spoil you right now is that I've had to have that bridge on the right side for a very long time, which is naturally sort of a very easy source of frustration. It's very tempting to want to actually just keep resetting until you get basically a good distribution of stations. And I will say that my distribution of stations were probably even less than ideal, even in terms of spawning. And but nevertheless, I wasn't really thinking too hard. I mean, I was sort of just I wasn't like in full-blown analysis mode, but at the same time I wasn't like half asleep, because actually the most of the runs that could have been very successful, I sort of just like lost because I wasn't really paying it as much attention as I should have, and ultimately I was just being very lazy, which is something you probably don't want to be when you're aiming for these achievements. So what you can see here now is that I've established the red loop as well as the purple loop, which sort of actually become fairly consistent. I will say that I was lucky enough to actually get a good distribution of stations on each loop. Maybe I mean, there's still 2 consecutive circle stations, but it's really not that bad. It could have been worse. And we will see later on the green line with two consecutive circle stations on the top. It's very normal in this kind of with this kind of with this kind of map and with this kind of spawn to get a whole bunch of consecutive circle stations, which leads to a lot of trouble. Now, I mentioned something about carriage usage, and one of the things I've noticed is that it's probably easier to put carriages on trains on lines where it's most likely sort of heading up to like a faraway place, where obviously there will be like congested passengers at all the stations at the end of a line. So if you look at where I think I'm going to be extending the green line to right now. Yep. So actually, I could probably I'll probably end up looping it around. You want the additional capacity to pick up all these additional passengers on the way back. And that's sort of like the theory I managed to formulate in my head, but already you can see that at just over 400, I'm already slowing down the whole process and just keeping an eye on everything, making sure that none of my stations get very full, and obviously reorganizing my trains to suit. And my sort of general metric for keeping an eye on overcrowded stations being a problem is like, when the timer starts spawning once you have too many customers at a station, when I keep an eye on the timer, I usually aim to try and get a train, or at least when the timer hits halfway. That's sort of like I try to make that my extreme point for ensuring that I will get a train to it by then. Of course, knowing which train as well as which train to transfer off each line is definitely important, because you need to keep an eye on all the other trains and ensure that that they are able to, and that where they deposit the customers is also important, because there will be points where you may end up making one previously uncrowded station overcrowded just to deal with a current station that's already crowded. So it becomes a very tricky management, that requires a bit of meticulousness, but also at the same time feels like, as I've said in the previous video, it feels like you're just running around throwing out fires, which is, for some people, it's not a very comforting feeling to have. And it's not a very nice feeling to want to deal with either. So that is completely understandable, really. So with the 2 loops established, the red and purple, naturally, as I mentioned in previous videos, it's nice to try and get 2 locomotives heading in opposite directions. I know I've sort of been moving trains around on the red line a fair amount, so like right now I can only see 1 train on the red line. That's probably because I moved the carriage or moved it over to the green line, but again, don't quite remember, as I'm sort of just commentating while watching my locally recorded replay. But nevertheless, I think I was lucky enough to get a good distribution of stations for the red and purple lines, such that they did not really require much attention, in my opinion. There is a little bit of laziness with the angles, I will admit, and again, like I said, I wasn't paying too much attention, and I'm not going to argue as to whether it is or is not a big deal or not, but I will acknowledge that it's something that if you want to try and sort of like min-max everything, micromanage everything, then that's definitely a point that can be taken as that definitely can be something that can be that is definitely something that can be taken as a point of feedback. So moving on, I've got another pesky station that's just spawned at the top left, and this is admittedly another example of my like my easy irritants at this map in relation to this achievement, because to reach that station, I will need to use a tunnel. But I'm already using 2 tunnels to traverse across areas that I cannot loop around otherwise. The blue line on the bottom, on the middle / bottom right, at the moment there's no station that's spawning, let's say, south of where the blue line is, so that I can loop my blue line around. And with the green and with the stations at the top, middle top left, again, I need the tunnel for it to reach the. I need to use a tunnel to be able to reach the stations from the central hub. You will notice that I, like before, I've linked these. I've linked most of these lines to end at the central square hub, because it's once again as by design of this game, I presume, having that the square is a station that the square is a type of station that does not spawn as much. So, and the other thing to keep in mind is that if you have unique stations, you will sort of want to try and bear in mind that, especially when you have trains with larger capacities, as in additional carriages, they will be liable to dump all those unique customers at certain station points. And so sort of just taking notice of where these customers are being dumped, I feel that's not maybe I should say dropped off, but I feel like dumped is dumped is the more amusing term, I will say, because it's, let's just try, like part of it is just sort of like, I'm sort of looking at this in a very game-esque thing and not as like dealing with real customers. So maybe that's why it's so funny for me to say dumb, because it's like, I'm not looking at these shapes as people. I'm looking at them as commodities, as people, no, as things I need to take care of, as things I need to manage, and not things that I should like try and genuinely care about. So I don't know where I was going with this one. But yeah, things are getting a bit tight, and certainly I have not paid too much attention to my mitigation efforts. So definitely this was something that can be improved in future runs. There is already a lot of micromanagement, a lot of shifting, but thankfully with my current system, it was pretty much all to be rectified. Going back to my point about unique stations, sort of which means that other lines will sort of be dumping the customers. As soon as at that point where I was saying that, you could have noticed that at the intersection of the red and blue line at the triangle station, there were a lot of diamond passengers being dumped there. And while it is convenient, it can also cause congestion issues, because then because then if it's not structured correctly, for example, like the blue train picking up the diamond customers and not immediately depositing them, not immediately dropping them off at the next station, that can cause further congestion, as the stations in between will have customers that are not attended to. So that's why I know I mentioned in a previous video that in terms of those type of unique stations, if you can get something where there is a drop-off point from another line to, how am I going to explain this? But if we take a look now, the 2-carriage blue train is heading to that point to pick up a bunch of diamond customers. It will continue moving on. It will pick up those unique customers, and it will easily move them to the next station. The next station, it will deposit a bunch of customers which are diamond customers, and that leaves space for it to pick up other customers and continue on. So, but if you have a station in the middle which has customers that need attending to, then those passengers will be left stranded. So I can't really specify in a theoretical general sort of way as to why it's important, but I can definitely attest in my own with regards to my own experience that it's definitely a strategy that is worthwhile using. So I'm just noting that on the left, going back to actually one of my earlier points about taking note of where your trains will be depositing the customers, you will note that I chose to deposit a bunch of customers at the Triangle station. That was because I noticed that the orange train had some Triangle customers, so I knew it would not be depositing the full load. And as such, I considered it safe enough for me to move to sort of just temporarily displace these customers for the time being while I deal with a much more congested station. And in terms of actually picking up, in terms of actually to what to choose at the end of each week, apart from obviously choosing the other if you're offered an option with tunnels, choosing between a line and carriage, again, there is no hard or fast or easy way for me to really offer some insight on that point, mainly because it's one of the things I would really like to do is sort of get some abstract general theory and like a more general understanding slash description of like how many trains should you have to align, how many trains is enough for a line in a current situation. But the problem with that is it's a bit hard to actually quantify some of the variables that you can actually like see. Like, for example, like right now, unless you did some rigorous observation, rigorous testing, rigorous analysis, you can't quantify the number of customers that spawn within a given period of time. And it may well be that like how the customer spawn is actually set to some random variable, and as such, sort of like trying to I want to say perform linear regression. Not linear regression, just perform some kind of regression analysis on those kind of things is not easy because the data collecting process is extremely tedious. I can conjure up in my head sort of like a way, like in a very hand wavy sort of way, how I would program something to sort of just recognize the shapes, recognize the stations, and then just like record every time a new shape pops up, that sort of thing. But it's not worth the effort, especially for a game like this where there is a lot that can be gleaned or understood simply by intuition or by feel. That said, I am pretty lazy in general, so it's like I can think of these ideas, but putting them into action is definitely another thing, and that's admittedly something that I can't see myself doing because it doesn't fall, it's not high enough on my priority list. So that's it. Things are definitely getting a bit more complicated. I was actually quite surprised at this point to actually have broken 1200 since my personal best before this run was about 1360, and I was actually going to use that footage to actually release a video attempt until I actually successfully completed this achievement without even realizing it. But certainly there's a lot of congestion happening, there's a lot of micromanagement happening, and I'm just sort of looking at my system now, I'm asking myself, how can I improve this? It does look like maybe the pink line, for example, seems a bit redundant, and certainly maybe I could say move it around somewhere. I'm just trying to think about where, but I can't really quite answer that question just yet. I'm thinking maybe on the right end of the pink line I could have moved it from a triangle station to one of the circle stations, which is actually what I'm doing right now, because it's after a while I sort of noticed that even though I've only got 5 stations on my red line, things were getting very congested, and yeah, it's obviously when I thread these lines through, it's as a means to sort of just help out these stations and so that they don't become so busy. Truth be told, I'm not actually sure how my purple line has managed so well, but certainly there is some certainly it's not all the purple line on its own. There is definitely the pink and orange lines to thank for this. I've had the station spawning in the top left for a while. It's been building up customers for a fair bit, but I haven't been able to do anything because there is no way that I can release my current tunnels unless I was actually actively going to detach a bunch of one bunch of other stations, so that would really leave like the blue stations on the right unattended for a bit, or all the green stations up the top unattended for a bit, while I tend to that circle station in the top left. Now, like, dealing with it at any given point was alright. It was more detaching a line from a bunch of other stations that was basically making me a little uncomfortable. So I remember what I did here, but I'm gonna wait for the game footage to show you what I did. But I think to some the decision is probably a bit obvious, and but yeah, we'll see in due course. You'll notice that I've extended the pink line to the orange line to deal with that one circle station in the middle, which is, like I said before, it's like when you have like 3 circle stations in a row, you're gonna get some congestion. And when there is plenty of customers spawning, you're going to get congestion on like the second last or even third last circle station because the train cannot pick up all those customers. So by threading the pink line through that and assigning an appropriate train or something with appropriate capacity, then that's sort of just one way in sort of dealing with it. So you can see right now I finally decided to detach the blue line from the stations on the right and just to deal with this pesky little station up on the top left. And naturally at this point I'm panicking a fair amount because there was a lot of tension on the green line. This orange line is very long and does not make me feel comfortable in any way or form. And finally a triangle station spawns that will allow me to not have to use a bridge for my blue line in order to reach the unique stations on the right. You cannot imagine how relieved I was at that moment. So, 1,383 at this port point. Still a lot of customers, still a lot of stations having a bit of trouble, still a lot of me running around, putting out fires, dealing with stations with high capacity. And it's at this point that I was like easily realizing that definitely this achievement definitely intended for the use of micromanagement, because even if you could have everything go in your favor, and the reality of it is that if you were to ask my intuition, that the number of trains and carriages are just simply not enough, because the distance you have to travel from each station is just far too much. And when I say that, I'm actually making an interesting observation here now, which is definitely something quite worthy to know, I might add. Look at any individual station and note the distance between that station and each of its surrounding stations. It may well be that the station spawning algorithm is actually programmed to say, okay, the next station can only spawn some set amount of distance away from surrounding stations. Because if you look at all the stations, it looks fairly equal in distance. And additional distance can only really be added by the lines. That is, the additional distance that can be traveled by the trains can only be added via the lines that you make connecting these stations. So, as with all achievements, it gets pretty tight up to the point where it gets pretty tight in the last 100 or so customers before the achievement goal. So naturally, I was very focused on mitigating the congestion. And what's funny is that it's nearing the end of another week. So it's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking, oh, I'm getting new resources. Quickly, I must allocate those new resources, which I did, definitely. And it may well be that may have been the saving grace, because by dealing with these moments, definitely allowed me to push over the 1,500 mark, which I will do in due course. But naturally, there were some very close moments and some very tight moments, And I'm not gonna lie, I could have very easily screwed up this run if I was not being as careful and meticulous as I was. So, I've broken 1500. Good lord, I'm happy. Good lord, I'm so glad I do not have to do this achievement again. So with that, thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next video.